So what we're going to do now is we're going to carry on from the first part. And what I've actually done is, rather than having a load of different PowerPoint slides, I've just added up. I've modified the PowerPoint slides that were up there. So if you have the old one that you downloaded, you might want to download the new one that's there at the moment. But I'll be making a change to that later on this morning. So you'll get the stuff coming through as we go through it. So we've got to the point now where we've got our database, we've created it, we've got a form to allow us to register. And now what we want to do, and we've actually inserted the details into the database. So what we want to do now is we want to actually log in. Okay. Now, what do we need to do to log in? Obviously, we'll need a page that has a form on it. Okay. And then we need to have some kind of, in the starting tag for form, we want to have a means of sending it to a PHP file that will actually go through the logic of checking to see if the user credentials are correct. And by user credentials, we're talking about the email address and the password. Or depending on how you've done it, you might have used a user name as well. Okay, whichever you like to work with. But in my case, I'm using the email and the password as part of the credentials. And you remember that we done from last week that the email we just put in as a straight text, but the actual password, what we done was use the password underscore hash function, which actually created a bcrypt encryption around the password, so that the actual data that's in the database isn't plain text. It's a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, so we need to check it. So we're going to have a file called, I've called it checklogin.php, and the method is still post. So we'll need to have that new page, checklogin.php. And in that we'll have the code that I'll go through now in a second. Now, the sample that I've put here is a very, very simple piece of code. I'm bringing in the header, bringing in the aside. I've got a check here for message filter input get message, similar to what we've done with the registration. If the check login fails and that there's some kind of a problem, which could be either of two things, right? One, the email address doesn't exist, or it does exist, but the password that was entered doesn't match the encrypted password that we put in. Okay, so those are the two cases. We'll send a message back to the login page. So this is the check that we had before, passing a get variable called MSG, which will be displayed down by the page. So on the main, then I've got just change the header to login page. I've got my form here, which is going from line 10 down to line 24. Inside that, I've got a bit of PHP. First of all, to check if the variable $message is null. Remember, $MSG rather is the filtered input of a message error message that would come back if there is an error. So if that's if it's not null, then we want to display it in red. So that's exactly the same thing that we've done last or earlier in the week with the registration page. Then I've just got very simple. I've got a label with enter email. I've got an input type email required, and ID is email, and the name is email. And the same then for password. Type is password, so it'll put dots in it or asterisks in it rather than the actual text that's entered. It's required. The ID is password, and the name is password. And again, remember what I said. The name attribute is the going to be the name of the variable that we'll get on the server when the submit is actually passed or clicked. So we've got type submit and click login, and it goes there. We've got the footer on the bottom. So that's fairly straightforward and simple. So now this check login page, what do we need to do there, right? Obviously, we need a DB connection, right? That's the first thing. Then we need to get the email and the password variables that have been sent from the client, the browser, to the server, which is where our PHP is running. So that's we'll use the filter input for that. We then need to get the stored password in the database for the email address. Remember, the password has been saved as a encrypted password. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to run a check to actually check to make sure that the password that was entered matches the encrypted password, and we do that with a PHP function called password underscore verify. And what it does is we pass it the entered password, and we pass it then the encrypted password, and it checks the two of them out. Okay, so to do that, we obviously need to get the value of the stored password in the database. Okay, but before that, what we want to do is we want to check to see if the email address exists. Right, so we need to verify that one record is returned, otherwise it means the email doesn't exist. Then we need to verify that the password entered in the email is stored in the database. And then we need to go to a landing page or return with an error message to the landing page or login page. So what we do in steps are: one, check that the email exists. Step two then is check that the password that was entered matches the encrypted password in the database. And then the third thing is, based on both of those results, we'll either go to a new page called the landing page, or we'll go to a page back to the login page, which will be displaying an error message saying that there's a problem here. Okay. So this is the check login code here. I'm just going to switch over here to here we are here, and we've got the login here. I'll just make the text here a bit bigger. So we're going through the code here, and we've got our firstly to connect to the database. We'll use our include. We'll then get the two variables, email and password, using the filter input post, and then email and password. Remember, the text here has to match the text that was displayed or that was entered on the form, okay, for the name variable. We're then going to run a query, and it's going to select, in this case now, I'm just selecting password because I only want to see the password from users where email is equal to :email, and then we'll do a bind value here. So again, this is very similar to what we've done with the insert, except the query is different. But the try, doing the statement execute, and the catch is exactly the same. So again, a little bit of cut and paste can speed up what you're actually doing here. Okay, we do a quick check then to find out the number of rows. So again, number of rows, a statement, row count. So that should be 1 if the email exists. Okay, now if it doesn't exist, or if it's equal to 0, that means that the email was not found. Now, you could, if you wanted to, decide to be really specific here and send a message back saying email doesn't exist. Okay, but we normally don't do that, because what that does, if somebody's trying to hack into our system, that's as good as telling them that that email doesn't exist. So if they don't get that error message, it's actually telling you that the email does exist, which then means that it's a bit easier for them then to actually go and actually hack your system then, because they know the email is right, so they can concentrate just the password. So normally we'll just send back something like this kind of text here, problem with the email and our password does not match our records. So that means if somebody's trying to hack your system, they don't actually know, is the email right and the password is wrong, or does the email not exist, or whatever. Okay, so just a tip: keep the error messages enough to allow the user to say where the problem is. You haven't put in your credentials correctly, but not specific enough to tell them that the email address is right but the password is wrong, even though we would know that. Okay, so if that's the case, that the number of rows is equal to 0, we're going to have a header location, and we're going to go back to login PHP with that. Now I was actually here. I shouldn't have that there for troubleshooting. Okay, what I actually done here, and this is an interesting thing, because a lot of the time we do need to troubleshoot. Okay, you might, for example, say, well, what do I want to do here? I'm going to send back password, or PW is equal to $.password or $.$ password. So that allows me to check to make sure that I've actually entered the right password here. In the run of things, you won't be doing that. You'll just be sending back the message variable here, whatever. Okay, but if we want to at any stage for troubleshooting, because within this environment it can be difficult enough, you do something and you expect it to come back and say everything's okay, and it comes back and says everything's not okay, or it says nothing. It can be hard to troubleshoot. So we need to be thinking of how we can do that. One way we can do it is to just do a pure echo, right? But if we're doing an echo with a header, what actually happens is it will echo, but then the header will take place and it will overwrite the echo, so we won't actually see it, right? You could put an exit, so there's that exit that's on the next line. You could put that between there and here and echo out the information you want to see. What I sometimes do is I'll put a variable in the URL so I can actually look at the address line and see it. Okay. Or another thing that I sometimes do is I'll just echo it, but I'll actually comment out the header. So the page will actually stop and I can see what's actually going on. And that could be a useful method of troubleshooting at this stage. But assuming everything's okay, we then come down here and what we've done is we've run the query. There's one record that's being returned. Okay, so we're going to have, we need to fetch the data. Remember what happens with a query. The query is run on the MySQL server. We're on the Apache server, the HTTP server. So what we need to do is we need to get the results from the HTTP server, or sorry, from the MySQL server into the HTTP server. And we do that using the fetch here. If we've got only one record that's returned, it's easier to use fetch. If we've got multiple records, we need to do fetch all, or if there's a possibility of multiple records, we use fetch all. But when we use fetch all, we get a multi-dimensional array, so we'd have to cycle through them. I'm just using fetch here because it's only always going to be just one record. And I'm making a new variable, $db password is equal to results password. Password, remember, is the field name in the database. Okay. So when we run a query in MySQL with PHP, we bring back an associative array. I have in my query just asked for password. So I will only have one record or one field in that record, password. And bear that in mind because some of the stuff we'll be doing later on will change that. But it's going to be called the field name, which is password. Okay, in the database. So I'm just making it a variable DB password, just database password. Okay, and I can close the cursor now. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the password verify, and it passes two parameters. One is the password that was entered, and the other then is the encrypted password that's been saved in the database. Okay, so what actually happens then is that this function will actually check to make sure that the password and the DB password are identical. Okay, so it's great in that sense. So if it's correct, that'll come back as true. If it's not, it'll be false. Okay. Now I've just been very lazy here. I'm just typing out text. So password is correct. Use header to relocate to the landing page. If it's false, it'll just print an error out. Okay. You'll need to implement that, and you've seen how to do that with the previous pages. Okay. So that's that there, and that's where we're going to put a stop to at the moment. Okay. So what I want you to do now is I want you to create your login page, and I then want you to create the check login up to that point where you can get it. But I want you to have it that it will actually redirect to a landing page, or it'll go back to the login page with an error message. You okay? So let me just stop the recording there.